Welcome to The Real Life Buyer. In this podcast, you will discover interviews with procurement and technical experts, business owners, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders. These experts will help you to develop and grow, accelerate your career, improve your business, save money, and buy smart. Now introducing The Real Life Buyer, Dave Barr.
Hello, and welcome to The Real Life Buyer. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to Daryl Williams from Compton in California. Daryl has risen from a tough neighborhood to go on an incredible journey leading up to his time in the White House as a former communications agency officer. Recognized by former President George W. Bush and President Bill Clinton, he continues his career today as an inspirational speaker and as the CEO of Alliance Seminars Coaching. Daryl celebrates an exemplary 20-year career of military service, enjoying the honor of traveling on Air Force Two whilst providing 24-hour emergency communication support to the Vice President. What I am so pleased to do today is discuss the subject of leadership with a man that has been immersed in a community of disciplined and powerful leaders for much of his life. So without further ado, I'm delighted to welcome Daryl onto the podcast. Hello, Daryl.
Hey, Dave. How you doing today?
Very well, thank you. And thank you so much for coming on.
Glad to be here.
You're welcome. So where do we start with a man of has a career like this? But let's start with you walking through the highlights of your background that led you to the pinnacle of your career.
Sure. So as you said earlier, I grew up in Compton, California. Some may remember the movie Boys in the Hood. And if they did, that's the era that I grew up in. And then my brothers and sister grew up during the era of Straight Outta Compton, right? So we were about 3, 6, 7 years apart. So everything that happened in those movies was pretty much what we were exposed to growing up. So For me, I was the oldest. So I always kind of had this, chip on my shoulder that I had to make good decisions because I don't know if they're going to try to follow my lead or whatever the case may be. So I wanted to make sure I was at least that other positive example besides, my mom and dad. And then growing up in Compton, at that time, it was the 4th most dangerous city in the United States.
Wow.
So, definitely a lot of, drug infestation, gang-related activity. And, you just find yourself in the middle just trying to make it. And probably my 11th grade year, things got really serious. And it was like, okay, what am I going to do after high school? I remember running to a recruiter, right? Wasn't thinking about the military day, but at that time, it was like, okay, what does he have to say? And once he started talking and explained to me about how they pay for college, you get to travel, learn a trade, I was like, you know what? This doesn't sound like a bad idea, right? So I actually told him I wanted to join, but I was only 17, so I had to get my parents' consent, even though they call it delayed entry program, right? Sign up going into your senior year, and then as long as you keep your nose clean, graduating your senior year, you go to basic training and advanced individual training. And I just remember my mom not wanting me to go and telling my dad, I'm not signing this paperwork. And I just remember later on in life, him telling me that he had to talk to her and hey, he's going to grow up eventually. Might as well support his decisions now. And that was really a life-changing moment for me because being empowered to make that decision about your life and having your parents to back you up. They were going off to basic training and advanced individual training. And it was really great because one of the things I learned there, that was my initial introduction to leadership, right? You meet these drill sergeants who are there that in the beginning, you think they're there to, ruin your life and cause havoc. But really everything they did, it was a method to the madness, right? They were stripping you of your individuality as far as the selfishness, and then they were building you back up with a sense of purpose and camaraderie. And it was just one of the best things I could have ever did. And some of the highlights, end up going to Germany after my first assignment. Great assignment there, a little bit challenging because it was something that I didn't think I could do. Because I went in as a military human resources person, but Dave, some of those contracts at the end, it says, and other duties as assigned. So for me, that read working in the post office, right? Or postal unit. I'm like, oh, okay, I can pitch some mail, right? But it was like, no, 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 no. You're going to be working at the warehouse where all that comes in. So you're going to be offloading these huge trucks, and Christmas time is going to be crazy. And I had to make a leadership decision like, okay, am I going to be miserable for these 3 years, Dave, or am I going to, just try to make the best out of this and kind of have that cup half full mentality? And I did, and kind of turned it into a game and made it fun. And it made the time go by a lot quicker. Competed in some competition boards because the military, they always want to test your knowledge. So I was fortunate to do like Soldier of the Month, Soldier of the Quarter, Soldier of the Region, went up to Soldier of the Year. I didn't win, but it was a great experience because I met a senior leader who recognized me from all the other different boards and was really like inspired by just my opportunities of continuing to try to further myself. And he told me that he wanted to see me. He's going to be in our area, I guess, in a couple of weeks after that board. And we just started talking about, the future of the military. And he was like, so where are you going next? And I'm thinking, I'm going to Fort Hood, Texas, going to be soldiering and prove my worth in this military. And he changed my assignment, Dave. He was like, no, there's something a little bit special about you. And I'm going to change your assignment to the Pentagon because I think that you can handle what they call a special assignment.
Wow.
And I didn't know what it was really about. I got there, it was okay, but it wasn't what I was used to. So to me, I almost sabotaged my own career, Dave, because I was trying to get out of there earlier than I was supposed to. And fortunately for me, the leaders over me at that time was like, we're not letting you go to a regular assignment from a special assignment. You don't fully understand it yet, but you will in time. So I always share that story to let people know that where you are in your career, it may not be where you want to be, but it could be where you need to be to prepare you for that next step. And that Pentagon assignment did, because eventually I went to a recruiting event for the White House Communications Agency. And that's when I knew what those leaders were telling me made sense, because now I'm going to a higher assignment, higher authority, a lot of responsibility. And once I got selected, it was like, okay, it was like real excitement, but then all of a sudden reality kicked in. It's like, what are you about to get into? They only recruit the best of the best. So you have Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and, everybody's A-type personality. So how do you make it, right? And for me, like I tell every person that wants to be successful, you find a mentor and you find accountability partners. Those two things have served me well throughout my whole career. Somebody that's been there before, and then people that you surround yourself with that can hold you accountable and help you get to where you want to go. So because of those mentors and those accountability partners allowed me to work for, 2 presidents, 2 vice presidents, and have the career that I could have never imagined.
Fantastic story. Incredible. As you say, the leaders saw something in you. Yes. Did they ever reveal what they feel they saw? It was just the way you behaved or your mindset on how you worked?
I think it was a little bit of the mindset, because that senior leader at that time changed my assignment. He didn't know what I did day to day, but he figured if this guy's going to all these competition boards, he must have a pretty deep hunger inside of him to want to be the best, right? But I think a lot of it also was the way I was answering the questions. Because in a special assignment, everybody can do it. But one thing I learned was it takes a lot of self-discipline, right? Those type of assignments, you're not meeting as a formation, as a group to do your physical training, right? You're not getting a lot of different orders all the time. You're really kind of like on self mode, and you really have to show a lot of self-discipline to maintain the military characteristics that you're supposed to have, while not being in that more structured, traditional military environment. So I think they saw that, hey, the way he carries himself, the way he answers questions, he's not afraid to speak to senior leaders. That's another thing. When you're in special assignments, you're around a lot of senior leaders, and you can't freeze up, right? The moment can't be bigger than you. You have to rise up to the occasion, as they say. And I think a lot of that was just my confidence, right? Being around these mentors telling me, hey, when you're in this situation, do this. When you're in this situation, think about this. And I took all those things to heart in every conversation that I had.
Yeah. Tease out some words you've used there. Confidence being one of those, obviously. So they've seen something in you. They've seen the right behaviors and attitude. They've seen you're getting stuck in, shall we say, into the activities. And you're showing the confidence of a person. And you're surrounded again by all these guys that, perhaps ladies as well, that have a tremendous influence on you. As everybody says, you become what you're surrounded by. You fit into your environment. So there's an awful lot of opportunity that you've been plunged into here that are influencing yourself.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah, that's really interesting observations there. Yeah, fantastic. So you've been in the military for an awful long time, and you've obviously been out of the military for a little while now. Are you able to say what you feel are perhaps the key traits of the military style of leadership as opposed to what you may see in a civilian environment?
Well, one thing I've learned is they're really similar depending on the environment that you go into. When I left the military, I was a contractor for an organization that supported the military. So I was still sort of in that environment. Then I went to a government agency that also supported. So I wasn't in that traditional private industry. So I've been kind of spoiled to the sense that I've been around other leaders that either were in the military, support the military. But your question, definitely, the discipline, the integrity, the selfless service, right? Those are the three things that definitely stick out, because when I talk to some of my peers that work in private industry, they'll say that, Darrell's a little bit different. It's kind of a cutthroat mentality. Leadership is kind of top down instead of bottom up. And depending on, the people that you're working with, they may not take your ideas. Where in the military, everybody has a voice. And then obviously the leader makes the final decision, but they make that decision based on input from platoon sergeants, squad leaders, right? Those type of things. So that's one of the things that I've noticed as far as those traits. But like I tell people, you don't have to be in the military to exercise integrity, discipline, right? Those things can be a common thread through any successful leader.
Yeah, absolutely. Very, 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 very true. As you rightly say, there's a lot of people, I guess, in the civilian world that are looking to do a lot of self-promotion, should we say, and climb the ladder. Yes. I've worked with a number of American guys through my career. And one thing I've noticed with the US is people don't seem to stay in a job for more than a couple of 3 years. Whereas traditionally in the UK, it's quite common to see people doing 10, 15, 20 plus years service. As an example, I'm working with a guy at the moment who is just shy of 50 years service for one company.
Wow.
And of course, when I was introduced into American management, should we say, and then especially, it's almost like a case of today there's one guy and tomorrow he's left and there's somebody else in his place. It's quite amazing to us. It really was a culture shock to see the change of people at the other end of the telephone or obviously meetings. So it's very interesting. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other thing I'm quite intrigued about, and I know you obviously have been immersed in the military, but you were obviously within the White House environment to a degree. And I suspect, hopefully I'm right, that the political arena, that perhaps in the way it works is slightly different. Did you get to observe any differences, the way a political environment and leadership styles in that environment are slightly different to those that you may see every day?
So interesting enough for us, Dave, when we were in that environment, like I said, we're all military, right? Supporting the chief executive, right? Head of state. So for us, even though we traveled with those individuals, right? White House staff, Secret Service, military aides, our primary focus was how do we provide the communications to meet the need of whatever that particular mission was. So the political piece that we experienced the most really was just the politics of how do you get things done, right? Because you have Secret Service that has, their whole mindset is protection.
Yeah.
Right. You have the staff whose whole mindset is we have to get a message out. You have the military aides that say, hey, our mission is in case of emergency, what are we going to do here? How are we going to do it? So just politically trying to maneuver through these different organizations. And then we have our role is, hey, we got to provide the communications to whatever happens and wherever he goes and whatever message he gives. And that was a great learning lesson because obviously we have some leaders that were very, very good at that political maneuvering and getting the best out of everybody. And then we had some, it was kind of tough, right? Because again, in the back of their mind, they had the military mindset of, hey, let's make a decision, let's get this done. And sometimes things may change, 3 or 4 times, and that can be frustrating, right? But you have to learn how to be resilient. And let me tell you this story. It wasn't on my trip, but one of my mentors told me it was a trip where they were overseas and the staff wanted all these different phones, right? Because they were like, hey, it's too many of us in this particular trip. We need to all have access. But what they didn't realize, Dave, is you can have as many phones as you want. It's only going to come across certain circuits, right? So the team members were upset, like, they keep asking for all these different phones. And the trip officer was like, so what? Give them phones. They want 9 phones, put 9 phones on their desk. And the guys were like, but sir, it's only going to go to the same 2 circuits. He's like, they don't know that.
Fantastic.
So they had 9 phones on the desk. They were happy, right? Told them that, depending on the other end, maybe a little bit of a pause or, things like that. Because, back before technology really took off. But just his mindset of don't take things to heart and take it so personal, right? They want phones. You know that you can only provide so many circuits. Where's that middle ground? And then that way the customer is happy and you're less frustrated.
Brilliant. Fantastic. I hope the VP had his own special line.
Oh, no, that was just for the staff.
That's okay then. Brilliant. The third string to your bow, should we say, is your role as a pastor. And now you have a situation where, again, you're a leader, but this is where people look up to you in a rather different and perhaps spiritual way.
Correct.
So alongside this is your love of helping to develop and guide young people, I believe. So what new skills or different skills do you have to employ as a leader in this situation to lead the community that you are immersed in?
So one of the things, Dave, I used to always tell people when I was in the military, right? I told everybody up front, I'm a thief. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I will steal anything that's good, anything that's positive for the military and bring it back to the community. Because again, I always tell people, whether you support the military, don't believe in them or not, but you cannot argue the fact that they're one of the most powerful forces on this earth, right? I don't care if it's a natural disaster or something going on in the world. It's like they know that we can lean to the military to help us in any situation. So I always look at it as, what is it about the military that people have this great admiration for? And again, it's the way they develop leaders. They take sons and daughters of America from any corner, right, of the United States, and they run them through this time-tested traditional thing that develops these great people. So when I started working in the community, right, so like you said before, I was a youth worker, and I became a youth pastor, and then now I'm an associate pastor. And one of the things I would do is what worked in the military that can work in the community, right? I'm always trying to find those common threads. And then when I used to work with the youth, right, you have to do the research. It's like in the military, right? If we're going to have a mission, you don't just go do the mission. You have to do the research. You have to look at, the different environments you're going into. What are the strategies that you need to be successful? So I did that with the young people, and I found out doing my research, all the kids weren't bad, Dave. They were just trying to cope with a world, whether positive or negative, that they were thrown into, that they had no choice. They were dealing with decisions, Dave, that adults made that were in the best interest of that adult, but were not in the best interest of the children, right? So it's like, okay, so how do you get through all of those defense mechanisms? Because after a while, kids are like, well, I can't trust Dave because Dave left me. I can't trust Darrell because he let me down. So I'm just going to put up this wall and not let anybody in. So I had to talk to the kids and, let them know that I understand what they're going through. And they're like, well, how could you understand? You work at the White House. I'm like, no, I wasn't always at the White House, right? I grew up in Compton. And they're like, what? How come you don't walk around with a rag, or how come you're not rapping? That type of stereotypes. I'm like, well, I still rap, but I don't do the rag anymore. And they're like, what? Say a little rhyme. So I would say a little something. And again, all of it was done, Dave, just to let them know that, hey, I know where you've come from. I cannot say I've lived exactly the way you lived, but I do empathize with you, and I want to help you make better decisions. So that was my whole strategy, Dave, that helped me, helping young people come up with their own strategy. Because this, especially if you have kids, you can't tell a kid what to do. Even if you know it's right, they have to make the decision on their own. So what I learned to do was, how do I better supply them with decision-making skills, a strategy that says, hey, whatever you have to do, right, look at 3 different ways you can do it, and then look at the possible outcomes. Not all the time you're going to have all the information that you need to make a good decision, but just like the military, you make the best decision with the information that you have at that time. And if you can bounce it off of a mentor or somebody else, and kids are notorious for the day, right? They'll go to their friend that seems all cool and say, hey, what do you think about this? And the kid gives them the wrong, advice, right? So I say, even though they may look like they're succeeding, they may have the same hurt that you have, but they hide it better. Yeah. I said, so sometimes I want to go to an older kid or maybe another adult that you trust. And then I would just tell them, try it, right? Try it. And over a period of time, a lot of the kids was like, you were right. It wasn't what I thought it was, right? My mom doesn't really dislike me. It's just the fact that some of the things that my dad did reminded her of me. So when she saw me, she saw my dad, right? So, getting these kids to understand, because I had to help them realize you can't go through life with this hate, right? This strong disliking, right? I always try to find like movies, music, sports, analogies when I'm talking to the kids based on what their interest is. And I'll give them a little story that kind of, they can see themselves in it, but show them what a different result could look like. And I tell you, Dave, it was one of the most rewarding experiences that I ever had. Because, you get older. I don't remember all the kids that were in my youth ministry and that I talked to, but I would see some of them in the mall and they were like, hey, Minister Williams, what's going on? I was like, hey, what's your name again? And, they would tell me, and I'm like, oh, okay. So how's everything going? And they would just tell me like this one trip that we may went on, or this one event that we went to, and they would say, hey, I remember one of the things you told us that night, because I'm always good at telling stories. Like, I remember the story you told us about X, and I never forgot that story, and it helped me deal with college and my first job. And, I'm in a relationship now, and you told me about how what my mom-dad relationship looks like doesn't have to reflect what my relationship looks like. And they remembered those things, Dave. And again, I chalk all that up to leadership.
Yeah. So obviously you're building a rapport and you're making them feel comfortable with yourself. So you're integrating yourself into their world in that respect then.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's quite interesting. One of the questions I was going to talk to you about, and in some way you've answered it, but I'll still ask anyway.
Sure.
So in respect of, a number of people believe that leaders can't be made, they can't be developed. Now, you've touched on the military creating leaders. So I guess you believe that leadership isn't something that it can only come from within. It can be taught. Is that right?
I totally believe that, Dave. And that's always one of those lifelong arguments and things of that nature. But, again, I'm a storyteller. So the ones that say it can't be taught, I always refer them to, and I don't care where you are in the world, if you look at a bunch of kids on a playground, particularly boys, if you just stand by enough and watch how they interact on the playground, right? There's that one kid, Dave, that, when he goes to the top of the slide, he doesn't come down the slide, right, all the time. He starts getting adventurous and says, what would happen if I jump off the top of the slide, right?
Yeah.
But no matter where you are, that kid jumps off the slide. 5 other kids around him see it and go, oh my God, Dave jumped off the slide, right? This could be second grade, right? the next day, right, at recess, now everybody else wants to see if Dave can do it again, right? So now Dave is, showing his leadership skills, right? His bravery, his confidence, whatever you want to call it. And then there's always that other kid that says, Dave, help me do it. Show me how you did it, right? And then there's a kid like, guys, that looks dangerous. I'll just wait for you on the other end. And that's okay, right? But that kid that was jumping off the slide, nobody taught him to do that, right? It was something inside of him, right? So those are those leaders that, yes, they may have it, born in them. But then the kid, Dave, that says, show me how to do it. How did you jump off the slide and not break your arm, right? That's taught leadership, right? So I've seen it, and a lot of us have seen it. We just didn't realize what we saw at that time until we went to college or trainings, and then you start getting the science behind it and the assessments. But all of the science is going to show you that leaders are taught and leaders are born.
Brilliant. I like those analogies. That's really good. Thank you for that. I was thinking about some of the words that describe a good leader, and you can come up with a dictionary of words. Are there certain ones that you say really stand sort of out and above other ones? We talked about, empowerment, perhaps some humility, honesty, integrity, discipline, perseverance, perhaps. Which are the ones? Is it, are there certain ones that stand out more than others to yourself, or do you think it's always going to be a combination of different ones?
I think it can always be a combination of different ones, but there are ones that stand out to me. And one thing I love about the military, they would have an acronym for leadership, right? And it was just one of those things we carried on cards. It was almost like, even to this day, Dave, you open up my wall, I got this old looking card, right? And it has leadership in an acronym to remind you every day of this is who you are and this is how you should carry yourself. And that acronym is use the words loyalty, discipline, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage, right? To me, that was profound, because I found that when I lived through those characteristics, not only did it help me in the military, but it helped me after the military. It helped me working in the community. It helped me as an associate pastor that works in marriage ministry, right? I find a way to how you introduce those words into a husband so that he can show his own leadership in his marriage, right? How do you introduce it to a young person that can introduce leadership in their life? And I tell everybody, like, hey, it's not mine, right? It came from the military. So feel free to take it, run with it, develop it. I said, but the more you practice those characteristics, the better you're going to find your life being. And especially if you have a life that you felt like you were dealt, a raw hand, right? Mm-hmm. Bad cards, right? Sometimes we spend so much time complaining about the hand we were dealt that we don't spend enough time developing strategies, right, to deal with those cards. And that's one thing I try to tell people, especially those that are having challenges in their marriages, right? What happens if we stop looking at our wife as a problem? What if it's us, right? What can we do as it relates to self-leadership, right? That loyalty piece, right? The discipline, right? The integrity, right? How do we show that in our marriage? Personal courage, right? And then once they come up with some ideas, right? Okay, you tell me which one that you feel more comfortable doing. Try that over the next 30 days. And let's talk again in a month to see how that worked. Now, some of them, Dave, were like, I tried it once, it didn't work. I'm like, hold up. Sometimes things take time, right? You've been married for about 15, 16 years, so you can't expect one incident of trying to flip it to happen, right? You got to nurture it, give it time. And then after a while, right, when they stick to it, they go, okay, I did see a little bit of a difference there. And then you kind of just coach them, on to say, okay, now let's just try to make that one good decision, 3 good decisions. Make 3 good decisions into a habit, make that habit into a lifestyle. And let's just see where your marriage is, 5 years from now. And every one of them that accept the challenge, they've all come back and said, our marriage is totally different. It's not perfect, but it's definitely healthy.
That's really good advice. It's fantastic the way you put that across as well. Yes, thank you. Thank you for that. I think it's perhaps a symptom of today's world that everybody's looking for the silver bullet, an immediate answer and an immediate solution.
Yes. And they have to realize that, hey, it took a while to get into that situation, so it may take a while to change that situation.
Yeah, that's right. Even when we turn to apps to solve our marriage problems, then that's not quite right, is it?
No, it's not. It's kind of limitation there.
Yeah. Okay. For those people that perhaps aren't getting it, so what factors and beliefs have you seen that prevent people from being able to step up and becoming that greater person that they are capable of?
That's a great question, Dave. What I've seen is a lot of it is, what I call self-inflicted wounds, right? Sometimes based on our environment, a lack of mentors, right? A lack of leaders around us, we tend to look at life as this is all that's out there. This is all I'm going to be. And sometimes, we have to find that person, that situation, and we have to talk ourselves out of that lack of confidence. And it's really challenging, especially for children, because sometimes, again, adults, we do that, right? Dave, you're not going to be anything, right? Dave, you're going to be just like your dad who was worthless. You start hearing those type of words, sometimes, you start believing it, right? And all it takes is that person that says, Dave, I just see something in you. Dave, the way you do this, right? Yes, you talk a lot, but who knows? Down the way, you may end up being a lawyer or a podcast host. So, keep talking, right? Just try to use the word for positivity. Yeah. So I think sometimes it's just self-inflicted wounds that we have to find a way to get out of that and realize that what we see is not always what it has to be. And I just really believe in my heart, Dave, that words are very powerful, right? Words can elevate or they can tear down. And for me, for anybody that feels like, they're in a situation that is hopeless, I would say, look at, and you mentioned earlier, the people that are around you. I'm not saying that you have to get rid of them, but like used to tell the kids, keep them in, right, the level of friends, but go out and try to find you a new level of people around you that are called associates, right? Get associates that have done some things that maybe you want to do, or maybe they were in relationships that were not that good either, but now they're in a better relationship. And then talk to those associates. And then you figure out, what is it that they do, that they've done. And again, I always preface this, that you feel comfortable that you can add to your lifestyle. Because sometimes what Dave does, I'm not comfortable doing it. But there are some elements of what Dave did that I could and could implement into my daily life. So I always try to tell them, break it down into friends, associates, and then out of those associates, right, develop or call it an inner circle or that core group where it's like anytime I'm making some life-changing decisions, right, I don't go to my associates. Now I go to maybe 3 people within those pillars of associates, and I let those 3 people help me with the decision. But you still ultimately have to make that decision on your own, right? So friends, associates, inner circle, and then always surrounded by mentors. I think those are the things that can help change how people look at things and can bounce from those situations that they seem or may seem to them like they'll never change.
All right. Yes, that's very interesting. Thinking about your role, particularly with young people for a second.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
If you see a young person that seems to exhibit leadership tendencies or competencies, sorry, I can't say the word, competencies,
yes.
But perhaps they're quite introverted, so they struggle to bring that out of themselves. How does a coach nurture those skills and develop them to let them, like your former mentors did with you, perhaps? What do you do to help them coming out of their introverted state and become the leader they could well be?
So one thing I do, and that's a great question, Dave, is I first have to show them. Sometimes you have to show people what success looks like, and then show them other people that were successful, that were similar to them. People don't realize, but it's very important that people see themselves, right, in these different stages of life. And for the introvert, like I would always find those stories, whether it's an athlete, an actor, a singer, right? Somebody in the industry that was an introvert. And I read up on their story. And then, like I always say, one way to always connect, I find out what do people like, right? So if somebody tells me, they're introvert, but they love sports and they love football, I will find an introvert that was a football player. It's like, hey, Dave, did you know that, Barry Sanders, the greatest running back possibly, or, in the NFL was an introvert? Like, no way, not Barry Sanders. And then we started just talking about some of those things that Barry did, right? That got him to, and it's always tell introverts, right? You can be a functional introvert, right? Never look at an introvert as a negative, right? But look at it from a positive. Because sometimes extroverts will look at it as positive, but they're also really can be negative because they talk too much.
Indeed.
Right. So I showed them the differences between introverts and extroverts and how both are needed in society, right?
Yeah.
And then I go to them, Dave. I say, hey, what are you good at? And most of your introverts, right? They're heavy thinkers. They're writers, right? They collect their thoughts. They don't speak first. They allow everybody else to speak. So I tell them how and show them how those traits are so needed in this society, because I tell them, what if we're in a meeting and, you got 5 extroverts? Sometimes we might not get anything done because everybody's talking over each other, right?
Yeah.
So I say, and I asked them, Dave, like, so if you were in that meeting, right, how could you, and you have the answer. And that's what I tell them, introverts have the answers, but sometimes we don't pause enough to allow you to deliver it. So I just asked them, what are those things that you do, right, that you can help get that message across? And I put them in a scenario, Dave, like, this situation depends on you, right? I don't care what's going on in this scenario. You have the answer. How could you do it? And this is what they come up with, Dave. I can write it down. I can send an email, right? I can set up a separate meeting after everybody else because I don't want to talk in front of that group.
Yeah, I understand, yeah.
Right. And I go, those are great. And then I ask them again just to, kind of solidify it, right? And go through each of those scenarios that they came up with. What's so great about sending that email right after the meeting? What's so great about sending that letter? What's so great about having that meeting after the meeting, right, with the supervisor? And they tell me, well, in that situation, everything is just one-on-one. There's no outside noise, things like that. So then I say, well, those 4 options could work in this scenario. I want you to think about those 4 options as you continue through your school, as you continue through college, right? Even if you decide to get married, right? Maybe you and your wife are not agreeing on something. Can you send her a text? Can you send her a card or a letter that explains, how you feel, right? I said, all those things as an introvert can make you a great leader. I said, but the biggest thing is you cannot shut down and you cannot shy away from the moment because the world needs extroverts and introverts.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, I think you touched on a word there. I'm fairly introverted myself, and the word reflective comes to me a lot. I like to reflect on something and gather my thoughts before I then respond. I don't like to be forced into a situation where I have to make an immediate decision unless it's absolutely critical. Sure. If I can have a chance to reflect, gather my ideas, deliberate some of the things, then come back with as far as I'm concerned, a more comprehensive response, I'm a lot happier. Yeah.
I love that, Dave. And that's one thing I tell leaders when I coach them, right? They're like, how do I get more out of my team, right? How do we get more, collectiveness and synergy? And one thing I asked them, like, how do you treat your people, right? The extroverts and introverts. And they're like, I treat them the same. I'm like, you can't do that. Yeah. I said, introverts might not speak up in your meeting. He's like, God, you're right. There's this guy, Dave. I know he has brilliant ideas, but he never talks. So one of the strategies I asked him was like, do you have agendas for your meetings? And they say sometimes they do, and they say sometimes they don't. I said, well, what if you sent agendas to those that you perceive to be introverts, right, a week out and say, hey, in next Thursday's meeting, we're going to talk about this. I noticed that you don't, bring up a lot because, you allow others to speak, but I'm really curious about what you have to say. If you don't mind, if you can email me your thoughts, right, on this particular topic. And then at the meeting, if you want, you can share, or if not, I can share those on your behalf. And something as simple as that, Dave, allows introverts, again, like you said, they don't like to be put on the spot. but they have a lot to say. So if you allow them to provide the information up front before the meeting, or, hey, I know this is a lot. Some of you can get back to me, whether you want to come back into my office or if you want to send me information after the meeting via email or text or whatever platform you use. That's fine as well. If you want to have a one-on-one meeting, my door is open to those ideas because I know that you have something to offer. Man, that opens up the world for introverts.
Yeah, I think you've just released a true nugget of gold there. I think that's a fantastic way that we've teased that out there. And I think that's so important. We're really saying that leaders take the time to understand the individuals, and therefore they behave in such a way that gets the best out of that individual for their circumstances. That is the difference between a leader and a manager.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. I think that's absolutely superb. Right, to put you on the spot then.
Sure.
Looking back at leaders that have inspired you, who stands out most to yourself? Who's the most inspirational person that you've come across?
Easiest name in the world, Steve Smith, without a doubt. Dave, this guy is one of the best leaders I've ever met. And to this day, I always tell him, like, I'm so fortunate to have him in my life. I've been knowing him for years. And I try to reach out to him, even if it's once a month, just to keep that relationship going. Because one thing I tell leaders is if you really want to grow the positive leader, it's up to you to keep the relationship going. It's not up to the mentor. It's on you to do that. And I met this guy at White House Communication Agency, just a superb leader. At that time, I think he was the chief of operations before he moved up to chief of staff. And I always got to tell this story about Steve, right? So one of my jobs when I supported the president was when we would travel, before they got there, I would be the motorcade driver for the vehicle that had the communications equipment in it, right?
Yep.
And the communications trip officer, who was Mr. Steve Smith at that time, would ride in that car, right? He would come in when we would get there early, but the day of the event, like we would ride to the airport together, get in the motorcade at the airport, Secret Service put everything together, then we go about our business. And I had saw him in the hallway a couple of times. We talked, but I never did a trip with him, right? So here's my first trip. I heard about, his legacy and, how great this guy was. So Dave, I'm like, I'm going to impress this guy. I'm going to do my best. He's going to remember me, right? So we're doing this trip to Miami, Florida. And as I'm doing the route to there, this is before GPS and all this. This is the Stone Age days, right? Where you're writing down things on your paper. And it was these three, and I don't know what you call them in the UK, but, they're kind of like roundabouts.
Yeah.
Where you go into a little circle and you can come out in three different areas.
Yeah.
And I tell you, Dave, this airport had 3 roundabouts all the way to the airport. I'm like, how am I going to remember this? And I tell you, Dave, I drove that route 5 times the day before just to make sure. So the morning of the event happens. All right, Mr. Smith and I get in the car because, I'm just going to take him there. And then eventually, they're going to put the equipment in our car and then we're going to be a part of the motorcade. So we're driving, Dave, and he's like, so tell me about yourself. Where you from? What made you join the military? Couple of minutes into the first roundabout, I'm like, okay, I made that one, and I got 2 more to do. And Dave, I'm trying to focus on this roundabout, and he's talking to me, and I'm trying not to be rude. And I miss the right exit out of the second roundabout. So now, Dave, I'm like, okay, do I tell this guy I'm lost? Or do I try to play it off and try to find my way back? And it just got to the point where that integrity word kicked in, right? It was like, just tell him. So I'm like, hey, Mr. Smith. He's like, yeah, go ahead, killer. He's only call people killer, right? Because you're always killing it, right? He said, go ahead, killer. I said, sir, I'm lost. He said, I promise you, I drove this route 5 times yesterday, and I knew these roundabouts were tricky. And he was like, oh, I believe you. I believe you. He said, pull over to the side. And we're like just on a regular street. I'm like, what? He said, just pull up to the side. There's a guy right there. Dave, he goes to this guy, tells him we're lost. We need to get to the airport, gets back into the car and says, hey, this guy said there's a back way. So we're going to take this back entrance and get to the airport. Now, this is a time of pagers, right? And beepers and all that. So the airport communications officer is blowing up his pager, like, where are you? They're setting up the cars. We need to do this. And he just sends him a text back saying, get your car ready, prep it for the motorcade in case I don't make it. And then you get the text back, what do you mean you might not make it? What do you mean put my car there? And he just goes back into the conversation, like talking to me like nothing ever happened. And I'm like, does he not understand that we might not make it? And he's like, we'll make it. Don't worry about it. And we find this back way. We get onto the airport, show our credentials. You know, it's not the way we're supposed to go in, but they knew what was going on that day. So obviously they let us in. And I mean, we got there. I mean, you're talking about by the chin of your hair, right? But here's what got me, Dave. We get there. The airport communication officer is screaming like, oh my God, this is too much stress. This is too much pressure. You know, what happened? Instead of him telling him the full truth, he tells him that we got lost and we ended up getting new directions. And because Darrell didn't panic, we were able to make it here. That was what he told the guy, Dave.
Oh, lovely.
So we get into the motorcade. We're going to all the events throughout the day. We get back to the airport. Trip is over. We're tearing down equipment. So I finally had my chance to really talk to him. And I'm like, Mr. Smith, first of all, you know, thank you for, you know, having trust in me and things like that. And I said, but why didn't you tell him the truth? He said, I did tell him the truth. He said, I told him my version of the truth.
Right.
And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, everybody can see things differently. And he said, one thing I saw, he said, trust me, I did my homework on you before I did this trip. So I knew what you were about. I wanted to see it for myself, right? And he said that, first of all, you getting lost taught me a lot about you, because I know a lot of people would have tried to fake it and try to find their way, and we would have really been lost. He said, but the fact that you showed integrity, you gave us enough time to rebound. Mm-hmm. He said, so second, I knew you're new into the agency. I didn't want you to start off with a bad reputation, because you know this, Dave, in any organization, sometimes perceptions are reality, even if they never met you personally. It's like, oh, isn't Dave that guy that got the trip officer late and didn't get to the airport on time? It's like he didn't want me to live with that type of situation hanging over my head, right? And so he said that I wanted you to get a fair shake. He said, second, I want you to understand that you're going to be in charge someday. You're going to be running these types of trips. I want you to show that same type of forgiveness to somebody else. He said, we got some high caliber people in this organization, but all it takes is a bad reputation, a bad trip, somebody that doesn't support them or turn them around, right, to help them reach their potential. He said, our goal as leaders is all of you have to reach your potential. Yes, you're in this agency, but just because you're here, you can't rest on your laurels. There's something inside of you that this agency needs, and we need it on every trip, every time. And that's where you become the best, because you bring it out whether you don't want to, whether you're having challenges at home. Your job as a leader is every trip has to be excellent. You got to be able to compartmentalize certain things to get that mission done. And I never forgot that, Dave. And to this day, you know, it's so funny. One of the best moments in my life was I had a decision to make, and I called him. I said, hey, sir, I need some advice from my mentor. And Dave, he said, first of all, thanks for calling me. He said, second, don't call me mentor anymore. We're colleagues.
Yes.
Dave, even though he told me that, I could never imagine myself being on the same level as him. But I know what he was saying was eventually you have to quit looking at yourself the way you see yourself. And again, that's that word, that's that perception that, you know, I'm always going to be less than. And he's like, no. You're going to learn from that. And then you will be the new Mr. Smith to somebody for your generation.
Oh, fantastic. Really lifting you up then, isn't he? Really?
Oh, man, he was great. And he still is. It's fantastic.
That's a very brilliant story. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. That's really good. Just thinking about how young people could be influenced by that story and the education systems that we know that exist in the US and in the UK and Europe. What do you think could we do to help young people when they're in school to understand what the positive traits of leadership are that perhaps they don't get at the moment?
I know for the US, one of the things that, and it's been going on before I got involved, but it's just one of those things that clicked with me, Dave, is volunteerism. Oh my gosh, when you can volunteer at a school, and here's the key I always tell people, Dave, don't volunteer trying to bring in your own agenda. Volunteer with the mindset of, how do I meet a need? I tell every leader that. I said, the greatest leaders are the ones that are trying to meet a need instead of push an agenda. So when I got ready to retire, I wanted to start my motivational speaking business. And I started talking to, I went to people that was on, I forgot, Speakers Bureau Association or one of those type of things. I would look at all the people that spoke with youth. I looked at their back bios, and a couple of them I called. And, you know, selfishly, I'm like, man, these guys haven't did half the stuff I did, right? So I'm for sure I should be just as effective. And I made a couple of phone calls, and I would call the ones that I thought were successful. And I asked them, you know, again, you know, what is it that drawed you to, you know, reaching these kids, and how do you know you're effective, and things of that nature. And some of their answers, you know, I didn't like, but some of them I really liked. And I started looking at different schools. I never forget, Dave, I called the schools like, hey, you don't know me, I'm Darrell Williams, former military, and I want to come speak at your school. And they're like, who are you again? Do you have a kid at the school? I'm like, no, I don't have any kids. They're like, well, why do you want to come to the school? It's like they didn't understand. They weren't used to it. So I reached out to somebody else, and they was like, hey, dude, you got to put a website together, right? People need to know who you are, what you bring to the table. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I got all these White House pictures, right? Me shaking hands with the president and stuff like that. I was like, man, what a neat way to use this stuff instead of just collecting dust, right? So I put the website together. I reached out to a couple of counselors, and then I started hearing about, you know, in the US, we have these career days where they bring in different speakers from different industries. And I went to I said, who is the person that runs all the career days like in that county? And they were like, well, there's one person over it, but every school picks their own date. I said, that's okay. I want to reach the top person. Sent that person my website, Dave. And then they were like, oh my gosh, let me send you out to all the different counselors so that way they can reach out to you individually, but we would love to get you. And once I started getting to the career days, that's when I had the platform to meet the needs, because now I have a captive audience. Well, sometimes they weren't captive in the beginning because they look at career day as a day to goof off, right? But I would always take it as a challenge. And one thing I would do, Dave, I would tell the counselors, like, send me to your class that has the most energy, right? I never say the worst or, you know, that, like, give me your kids that have the most energy. And they're like, are you sure? Because we don't want to scare you off. We want to make sure you come back. And I'm like, no, it's okay. Because I know, Dave, and I feel in my heart that I have a story that's going to resonate with these kids, right? Going up from Compton, joining the military, working at the White House, flying on Air Force Two. It's like, you know, who can't get with that type of story? And the career days, right? It really helped me to get that audience, like you said, to get to those kids, to be able to share some leadership strategies, decision-making, things of that nature. But then I realized, Dave, I couldn't do it by myself. As much as I loved it, I understood it was my calling and my passion, I had to send out like a call, right? So some of my friends that I knew, those associates I talked about, right? Hey, man, what are you guys doing? There's a lot of schools looking for people to do career day. You don't have to do, you know, 6 or 7 like I do every year, but maybe you can just do 1 or 2 based on your schedule. Didn't force them, didn't make them feel uncomfortable, but just offered it to them. And a couple of them started doing it, and I found out some of them were part of fraternities. I was like, hey, can you pass this on to your fraternity friends? Can you pass this on to whatever other organization you're part of that I don't know about? And then we started bringing in more males, because one thing I found out, the county I was in, I would ask a counselor, like, what can we do? Like, I'm going to be here every year as long as I'm not traveling, right? And normally I block that day off when I travel. And at that time, she told me we need more males. She's like, we have a lot of young men and young ladies that are in single family households, and they don't have a lot of males in their circles. If you can bring some males, and I just made that my campaign the next year, right? I'm going to let them know ahead of time so they can plan it. And I want to get as many males as I could, right, to be a part of these career days. Because that's what I found that helps out in the schools. If you can find where's that need, and then the part of you that's gifted in that particular area, right? How do you use that to meet the needs for these kids in these schools?
Brilliant, brilliant. That leads nicely on to how do people follow you, learn about you? Where's your website? Can you share those details?
Sure. Our website is allianceseminars.org, right? Alliance Seminars with an S.org. They can also find me on Facebook, Alliance Seminars Coaching. And also I do a lot of motivational speaking, right? I love doing that because, like I always tell people, I'm not caught up into the accolades of all the stuff that I did. I tell them that only thing that means is there's a lot of different ways that I can help people, right? Yeah. And again, one of my mentors finally told me, like, Darrell, you need to write a book, right? Who grows up from Compton and flies on Air Force Two? You need to write this book. So I'm finally, taking that seriously. So I'm on chapter 4 of chapter 15. Yep. And some of the stories I just shared with you, and I appreciate you asking me those questions, because a lot of the stories that I want to tell are the ones that I'm sharing on the podcast, because I know, like you found out, there's meaning behind those stories, and those stories can help somebody else. So the book is not about, me on my journey of bragging, but it's me on my journey of leadership and how it helped in all the different phases of my life. So that's, again, one of those reasons that I do these podcasts, because I really love helping people.
That's fantastic. You have to make sure you let me know when the book's released.
I definitely will.
Yeah, I'll certainly circulate that information.
I appreciate that.
Oh, no problem at all. So lastly, obviously, we've taken up nearly an hour. It's quite incredible. I could talk to you all day, I think.
I appreciate that.
Would you like to just share just finally, Alliance Seminars? What's this all about? What will people get from this side of your life?
Sure. It's really a simple organization, right? It's a veteran-owned, faith-based organization that provides clients with coaching services, motivational speaking, right, and certified workshops. And the beauty of it all, which is great, is I get to run this organization with my beautiful wife, Veronica, right? So I deal with leadership, purpose, and relationships. And then on the female side, right, she deals with women's empowerment, relationships, and purpose. So I recognize that, there's a female audience out there that I cannot connect with, and I'm okay with that, right? But my wife has so many great experiences, right? Being a spouse of a military veteran, she knows those challenges, how to make a relationship work, right? Because there's always tension, whether you're in the military or you may be married to somebody that travels a lot in their business, right? Yeah. And she's so gifted and great about, talking to other wives about these are the things. Don't focus on them not being there. Focus on the ways you can help them and make them feel comfortable and not worry about you when they're not there. And she just does a great job of that. So, tomorrow we celebrate 23 years of marriage.
Oh, congratulations.
And thank you. And one thing I told her that, my other job, right, is I'm her executive assistant. So when we're trying to do bookings and things of that nature, like that's my role. And Dave, I love that role because that's my way of giving back to her, supporting me all those years, that we were married together in the military. Like, this is my way of paying it forward with her. Like, let me be your executive assistant. Let me do anything I can because you have a voice. Women need to hear how you can help them. And I just love that part of what we do.
Well, what can I say is it's been a fantastic podcast, fantastic interview. And the amount of information you've shared, those true nuggets of gold, I think have been incredible. So I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us today.
Dave, thank you so much for having me. I really love what you're doing. Like I told you in our pre-meeting, I just think podcast hosts are fulfilling such a need in this world, right? I mean, I never would have met, right, somebody as great as you had it not been for Podmatch and these podcasts. So I just think every podcast host out there is just really making a positive influence in this world. And I just salute you and want to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate that. Well, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day. So I know it's relatively early for you still. So have a great day and take care of yourself, Darrell.
Hey, you too. Looking forward to connecting again in the future.
Bye-bye, mate. Bye. So there's another Real Life Buyer podcast. I do hope you enjoyed it and it's given you some ideas and inspiration for greater action and achievement. If you are a purchasing or a supply chain professional, business owner or director, come and join my Facebook group, the Purchasing and Supply Chain Community Hub, a safe place to engage with like-minded, friendly people. See you soon. Bye.